So all you have to do is make sure you don't crush your estrogen, especially not for prolonged periods of time, as we see over and over and over and over and over and over again. People that crush their estrogen eventually get themselves hurt. Vigorous Steve here, with the over-the-counter supplements and the micronutrients and the training methodologies and the massage therapy methods out of the way. We can finally get into the performance-enhancing drugs for healthy and strong joints, tendons, ligaments, connective tissue, skeletal muscle, and even skin and hair, because it's all dependent on collagen synthesis. And when you have the building blocks and the proper training strategies in place, the performance-enhancing drugs will take that to the next level and make sure you stay injury-free. Many of the performance-enhancing drugs that we're going to discuss in this video are actually used medically in cases of osteoporosis and sarcopenia or wound healing. And that's where we'll have to look when we design a cycle of performance-enhancing drugs regarding the health and strength of connective tissue and prevent yourself from getting injured. Because again, the data is there, the literature is there, you can do the research and then design a cycle for yourself. Well, I already did the designing for you, so you just have to watch this video and then take some of that advice and things for your own consideration, so you can have your tendons of steel as well, as my tendons are of steel at the moment. And I think my performance-enhancing drugs are starting to kick in because there's a lot of collagen synthesis going on in my chest, and it's getting more on a daily basis. Okay, let's just get into it. Collagen synthesis occurs through many different pathways, right? Given that you have the micronutrients and proper training in place, it goes through the androgen receptor, through the estrogen alpha and beta receptor, the progesterone receptor, the growth hormone receptor, and even the insulin receptor and IGF-1 receptor contribute because they allow for nutrient uptake, which then helps with the building and forming of collagen type 1, 2, 3, 4, dependent on which specific tissue you're trying to stimulate that in, right? Because every tissue has its specific ratio between collagen types, and there's many different collagen types. And that's why a performance-enhancing drug protocol aimed towards the tendons and ligaments and connective tissue might be a little bit more cumbersome than you might expect, because again, you're trying to optimize this collagen synthesis and allow collagen synthesis within the connective tissue to keep up with the collagen synthesis within skeletal muscle, which is growing at an accelerated rate compared to the tendons and ligaments, because it's easier to form collagen type 1 and 3 within the skeletal muscle compared to the connective tissue. And also because connective tissue doesn't have as much blood flow. It doesn't have so much oxygen and nutrient delivery as the skeletal muscle has. I mean, when you look at the vascular system, most of the blood flows through the skeletal muscle and not so much flows directly into the tendons, or the bones for that matter, where the tendons are attached to. So in this video, we'll design a cycle based on collagen synthesis through the different pathways. Now, guys, I know you guys are waiting for the androgen receptor pathway, but we'll save that for a little bit later. Let's optimize the progesterone receptor pathway first, which we'll later discuss a little bit more in depth through the androgen receptor pathway, because, well, the Primobolan, the Nandrolone, the Testosterone, mint, and all the other progestogenic 19-nors, which potentiate anabolism and collagen synthesis through the progesterone receptor, albeit at different levels of affinity compared to endogenous progesterone. Now, I'll save the progestogenic 19-nors for later in this video when we'll discuss the androgen receptor. Again, they potentiate anabolism and collagen synthesis through the androgen receptor and the progesterone receptor. But first, I want to discuss the progesterone receptor or the progesterone pathway in the context of downregulating the hypothalamic pituitary testes axis. Because when you take steroids or selective androgen receptor modulators, you downregulate the HPTA, right? You're taking endogenous testosterone, DHT derivatives, or progestogenic 19-nors, and the testosterone production within the testicles basically shuts down. Estrogen production goes down with it. And now you're supplementing and replacing your endogenous production with an exogenous administration. Your HPAA, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, doesn't completely downregulate. You'll still produce DHEA and pregnenolone. The pregnenolone cascades converts into progesterone, but it's not going to be to the same level as it used to be without exogenous steroids or SARMs in the picture. So you see that progesterone levels decline as well. The DHEA, the DHEA sulfate, the pregnenolone sulfate, and even allopregnenolone, right? All those neurosteroids, progesterone, will all reduce in the presence of exogenous testosterone because the HPTA shuts down and the HPAA downregulates. So we'll have to find a way to keep that going because we get a little bit of collagen synthesis, beneficial collagen synthesis for tendons and ligaments and connective tissue through the progesterone pathway. Now, we can do that several different ways. We can take ACG, 250 IUs 3 times per week. Might be enough, might not be enough, depending on which other performance-enhancing drugs you're taking, because the progesterogenic 19-nors also send a negative feedback through the progesterone receptor. So if you're on Nandrolone, Trembolone, Ment, 250 IUs ACG 3 times per week might not be enough. You might need 500 IUs ACG 3 times per week, or maybe even 1,000 IUs ACG 3 times per week, depending on the dose and your individual response and which compound you're running. There's a big difference between a therapeutic dose of 50 milligrams Nandrolone compared to 1,000 milligrams of Trembolone, right? Maybe 1,000 milligrams of Trembolone per week, the ACG will be completely ineffective. And, well, you're supplementing this progesterone receptor pathway with plenty a Trembolone, which will, right, more than sufficiently promote collagen synthesis in the connective tissue. So you'll really have to go by how you're responding to particular compounds in your performance-enhancing drug stack, which might change the dose of ACG as you're going forward. So ACG is a method to keep progesterone levels somewhat sufficient for collagen synthesis in the connective tissue. You can supplement with HMG instead, 75 IUs 3 times per week. For most people, that's sufficient. And if both of those are unavailable, again, the ACG and the HMG are getting increasingly scarce nowadays, you can look into pregnenolone supplementation, which will convert into progesterone downstream, maybe 10 milligrams per day, 25 milligrams per day. For me, 25 milligrams per day of pregnenolone supplementation is sufficient to keep my progesterone levels in the bloodstream detectable, right? So they're not over the reference range, but they're somewhere at the top of the reference range. And then I get additional collagen synthesis through this little bit of endogenous progesterone, which is being converted from pregnenolone. So whatever direction you decide to go, either ACG, HMG, or a combination of pregnenolone and DHEA. Again, the DHEA doesn't convert into progesterone, it converts into testosterone and estradiol. But you just want to keep a nice normal balance of neurosteroids between the neurosteroids and the sex hormones to keep everything as balanced as possible for libido, well-being, and collagen synthesis in the connective tissue and the skeletal muscle, the skin and the hair as well, right? Your body doesn't only work on testosterone and estradiol. There are many intermediary hormones which also play a contributing factor in all of these processes. Now, when it comes to the estrogen alpha and beta receptors, there are actually several studies performed on mice which show that particular estrogen receptors potentiate more collagen synthesis in particular situations. So to boil it all down, to make it simple, the estrogen alpha receptor potentiates more collagen synthesis for wound healing, predominantly in the skin. And the estrogen beta receptor potentiates more collagen synthesis when it comes to the healing of tendons, connective tissue. So depending on what you want, well, in the context of this video, it's mostly about connective tissue, tendons and ligaments. So we'll have to look into the estrogen beta receptor and not the estrogen alpha receptor. But if you want both, well, estradiol potentiates collagen synthesis through both receptors. So all you have to do is make sure you don't crush your estrogen, especially not for prolonged periods of time, as we see over and over and over and over and over and over again. People that crush their estrogen eventually get themselves hurt. Unfortunately, I wish more people would know about this. You can crush your estrogen here and there for a photo shoot For a contest, right, you hold a little bit of water and it's easier to dial yourself in to look absolutely phenomenal. There's no way or no reason to do that any longer than 3 to 4 weeks at maximum. Probably if you have a good coach and you know what you're doing, 2 weeks of crushed estrogen is all you need to look phenomenal in pictures, on stage, wherever, right? So don't do this year round. In most cases, I would say keep your estrogen at the top of the reference range. And if you have to lower that for particular reasons to get your body fat under control, for example, there are other methods to stimulate the estrogen beta receptors and potentiate a little bit of anabolism and collagen synthesis on top, like Turkesterone, for example, or Ecdysteroids. Right? They potentiate anabolism and collagen synthesis through the estrogen beta receptors. So if you do come into a position where you need to reduce your serum estradiol concentrations, or you're taking a dihydrotestosterone on top of your testosterone and you're reducing the potential for aromatization of testosterone into estradiol, maybe there's something to say for having turkesterone in place to potentiate some collagen synthesis for healthy connective tissue, while estrogen is not at the top of the reference range, right? Because turkesterone, for example, nobody has ever associated that with water retention. All I see in the reports when I tried it during a post-cycle therapy, my wife tried it, all we saw was benefits. It doesn't even downregulate the HPTA. So luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone levels remain intact. It's another way to get additional collagen synthesis for healthy joints, tendons, and ligaments, besides keeping your estradiol favorable somewhere at the top or maybe even slightly over the reference range. Again, guys, don't crush your estradiol levels for prolonged periods of time, because low estradiol levels not only will have a negative effect on your connective tissue, but it's also basically the main cause of osteoporosis. And that's where your tendons are attached to. So if you're chronically crushing your estradiol, resulting in weaker bones and weaker tendons, well, guess what? That little attachment between the bone and the tendon is now weaker too. And I think if we go through all the muscle tears that ever occurred in the fitness space, you can almost pinpoint that every time the tendon separates from the bone, it's because of low estrogen. Because the tendon is weak, the bone is subject to a little bit of osteoporosis because of this chronically low estradiol concentrations, leaking calcium and magnesium and phosphorus from the bones over time. And that just causes the bone and the tendon to separate. And before you guys get bored, let's go over the anabolic androgenic steroids and discuss collagen synthesis in the context of connective tissue when mediated through the androgen receptor. Now, I already made a short list. I did my research based on steroids which are still medically prescribed today. So not the medically prescribed steroids of yesteryear or yesterdecade. Because again, Masteron was prescribed in cases of estrogen-positive breast cancer, but it has an opposing effect to collagen synthesis because Masteron inhibits the conversion or reduces the conversion of testosterone into estradiol by temporarily taking its place in the aromatase enzyme. But there's also evidence that Masteron inhibits estrogen-mediated gene transcription, so that's something you definitely don't want in the context of having as much collagen synthesis or beneficial collagen synthesis within the connective tissue and skeletal muscle, because part of that is going through the estrogen alpha and beta receptors, and you don't want to inhibit that in any way, shape, or form. And it's the same with Primobolan. It used to be prescribed for osteoporosis, but has been pulled off the market for human treatment for decades now. Same with Boldenone, right? It's not FDA approved for human use. There's no medical application for humans. So I made a short list for still medically prescribed steroids as of 2021. There's a lot of clinical data behind these steroids, and they're still being prescribed for sarcopenia, muscle wasting, or osteoporosis, which is leaching of the minerals from the bones. And again, it could be due to estradiol deficiency, or wound healing, right? In special cases like burn victims, for example. And perhaps there's something to say for androgen deficiency, right? Clinical androgen deficiency resulting in hormone replacement therapy. Now, those 4 medical conditions all have their specific steroids and specific solutions. And when you put all those solutions together, it results in a decent amount of collagen synthesis, whether that's in the connective tissue, the skeletal muscle, the skin, hair, right? You potentiate a decent amount of collagen synthesis so all the tissue can be healthy. The testosterone will be in place to provide additional estradiol, again, to promote collagen synthesis through the estrogen alpha and beta receptors. Testosterone by itself potentiates a little bit of collagen synthesis through the androgen receptor, but let's be honest, let's be fair, testosterone is not the best when it comes to collagen synthesis. Now, there's studies saying that collagen synthesis is reduced by 50% to 80% when you go on testosterone. I don't believe that's the case in any way, shape, or form. Myself, many clients, and basically everybody that I've talked to, they did a testosterone-only cycle at very high dosages, keeping the variable into perspective that estradiol was in range or slightly out of the reference range, and progesterone levels were somewhat sustained, either with the ACG, HMG, or Pregnenolone supplementation. In that context, with progesterone and estradiol sufficient, testosterone did not reduce or impair the integrity of connective tissue in any way, shape, or form. I've never heard anybody get themselves injured by doing a testosterone-only cycle. Really, never. Not 1,000 milligrams, not 2,000 milligrams. I've even heard guys run 4,000 milligrams. More power to them. I don't think I'd be able to tolerate that, but I've ran 2,000 milligrams of testosterone in the past with Pregnenolone supplementation in place, and my estradiol somewhere around 50, 55, sometimes even 75 picograms per milliliter. I didn't have Turkesterone in place at the time because that supplement didn't exist. Connective tissue felt very, very, very good. Again, I was supplementing the collagen, making sure I get a sufficient amount of micronutrients to promote collagen synthesis, and I was doing all these exercises that helps with connective tissue and stretch it under load a little bit where applicable. I've never had an injury, and everybody that I've talked to which did similar approaches never had an injury following this protocol as well. But again, let's be honest, Primobolan, Nandrolone, well, and most of these steroids actually, but in this video we're going to limit it to Nandrolone, Primobolan, and Anavar. Those 3 potentiate way more collagen synthesis than testosterone alone. So let's look at it this way. We're going to use a sufficient amount of testosterone for sufficient amounts of estradiol. Those 2 will potentiate some collagen synthesis and keep the connective tissue healthy, but not super strong. And that's why the Primobolan, the Nandrolone, and the Anavar is in place at different dosages in relation to testosterone to keep the collagen synthesis optimized and the connective tissue stronger than what would be otherwise possible with testosterone by itself. Now, Primobolan potentiates, depending on the study that you read, twice as much collagen synthesis, and Boldenone potentiates 3 times as much collagen synthesis as other steroids, and Nandrolone maybe 5 times as much or 2 times as much, right? It really depends on which study you read. Just keep in mind that all these studies are performed in specific medical conditions, right? Or animal studies where tendons or skin were cut, and then they want to see how much of a beneficial effect regarding wound healing or the healing of tendons these animals are going to get, or human studies where people are experiencing sarcopenia or osteoporosis or wound healing due to being a burn victim. But those are medical conditions that I don't have, and you probably don't have, and it's going to change the individual response and also the outcome when taking any of these steroids by themselves or these steroids in combination when it comes to collagen synthesis and the integrity of connective tissue. Again, because I couldn't find a study that combined testosterone with sufficient amounts of estradiol and sufficient amounts of progesterone in the system with a therapeutic dose of Nandrolone and a Primobolan to supply a little bit more anabolism, and Anavar to keep everything pieced together nicely. And growth hormone and GHK-copper, which we'll discuss a little bit later in this video. There's no study that shows the efficacy of all of these performance-enhancing drugs combined. They've all been examined separately. So we're going to have to lead the way a little bit and then invoke some bro science and put that all together and design a cocktail that might have a little bit of a drug interaction, but that's all for the benefits of the collagen synthesis in the connective tissue and keep them very, very strong. The reason why I chose Nandrolone over Trenbolone or Testosterone is because it's still medically prescribed nowadays. Now, I would only recommend a therapeutic dose of Nandrolone, considering that it does potentiate a little bit of water retention and also promotes the conversion of testosterone into estradiol, because Nandrolone is an intermediary in that conversion process. So we're looking at a therapeutic dose of Nandrolone to help with a little bit of water retention, but not to the point that it detracts from our cosmetic appearance. Again, a little bit of Nandrolone goes a long way, whether that's 50 milligrams, 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams per week. And it also helps a little bit with the synovial fluid in the joint. So it helps with lubrication. That's why a lot of guys will resort to Nandrolone to keep their joints, tendons, and ligaments healthy and strong. Because the Nandrolone, uniquely to Nandrolone, is the synovial fluid in between the joints or within the joints, allowing for minimal friction and allow the joints to move very fluidly. Now, when it comes to collagen synthesis, Nandrolone has its benefits, especially combined with the other compounds that we'll discuss in this list. But predominantly, the best and the most amount of collagen synthesis, whether that's in the skin or the connective tissue, that's going to come from Oxandrolone, Anavar. Oxandrolone not only promotes collagen synthesis, but it also helps with mineralization of bones. That's why it's prescribed in cases of osteoporosis. And that basically means that it has a multitude of beneficial factors when it comes to the integrity of connective tissue. Not only does Oxandrolone help with the strength and growth of skeletal muscle, it also helps to keep the connective tissue, the tendons and ligaments, strong and healthy. It helps to keep the bones strong, but also the connection between the bones and the tendons. And that's why I always incorporate a little bit of Oxandrolone in my cycle or my client's cycle, because a very low innocuous and bikini competitor dose of 5 milligrams already gives you this beneficial effect. And the reason why we're going with the lowest effective dose of Oxandrolone is because that's sustainable. Again, Oxandrolone on a milligram for milligram basis is far superior compared to testosterone, Nandrolone, or Primobolan when it comes to collagen synthesis and the integrity of connective tissue. But it also passes the liver, right? And it's additional anabolic androgenic steroids that you're taking orally on a daily basis, potentially resulting in some side effects like acid reflux. For example, that's quite common with oral steroids. Now, you can bypass that a little bit by taking Oxandrolone sublingually. Again, a lowest effective dose that's sustainable will allow for sufficient amounts of bone mineralization, increasing bone strength and mass for the entire duration that you're on cycle. Now, the reason why Primobolan is in place, even though it's not really prescribed for specific cases where collagen synthesis is required, there's evidence that it has more collagen synthesis on a milligram for milligram basis over testosterone. Now, considering that testosterone converts into estradiol, Nandrolone speeds up the conversion of testosterone into estradiol or promotes the conversion. There's only so much estradiol you can have, right? And you want additional collagen synthesis from another anabolic steroid on top to keep your tendons and ligaments as strong as possible by promoting collagen synthesis through the androgen receptor without having too much estradiol or too low estradiol in place to keep the collagen synthesis through the estrogen alpha and beta receptor pathways going strong and optimal. So the Primobolan is there to provide additional collagen synthesis and act as a temporary aromatase inhibitor, right? By taking the place of testosterone in the aromatase enzyme and temporarily preventing the conversion of testosterone into estradiol. While when testosterone does go into the aromatase enzyme, Nandrolone is there to optimize the conversion. So we'll have to find a nice balance and a ratio between all of these compounds, because some increase aromatization and some reduce aromatization. But all will promote collagen synthesis in skeletal muscle, connective tissue, and some will help with bone mineralization to help keep the bones strong as well, and allow for the interlinking between the bone and the connective tissue, being the tendons and the ligaments, to make sure that everything is functioning accordingly and optimally, and the joint integrity remains intact. Now, growth hormone contributes to collagen synthesis highly, but it also helps with collagen deposition within specific cells. And whether that's within skeletal muscle, the tendons, the ligaments, skin, hair, in the form of keratin, that's not collagen, but another structural protein. When growth hormone contributes to collagen synthesis, it deposits it within specific cells, which then strengthen these specific cells. The structural integrity improves. And that's highly beneficial for connective tissue, where the growth hormone can contribute to the strengthening and deposition of the collagen within. Assuming that you have the collagen and the micronutrients and perhaps the other performance-enhancing drugs in place to optimize this entire process of collagen synthesis and deposition, making your tendons, ligaments, and connective tissue super, super strong. Now, a contributing factor for this would be insulin or IGF-1, right? Both contribute to nutrient partitioning and the nutrient delivery into specific cells. I won't go into details in this video, otherwise it will be way too long. Of course, we all know that growth hormone helps with the production and secretion of IGF-1 from the liver. So by going on growth hormone, IGF-1 levels by definition will increase, unless you're taking metformin or a high dose of berberine or curcumin or everything combined, right? That might inhibit IGF-1 secretion from the liver. But if you're not doing that, by going on growth hormone, IGF-1 levels will increase, which will improve nutrient partitioning and absorption within the cells. And then all these building blocks that you're taking in the form of supplements, or the performance-enhancing drugs that you're taking alongside the other compounds discussed within this video, that's a lot of potential for optimized collagen synthesis in the skeletal muscle and in the connective tissue, making everything super, super strong. I also want to mention GHK-copper, and even though the research and the data is at this point quite limited, I still notice that there's a beneficial effect of running GHK-copper at different dosages depending on how much of the other performance-enhancing drugs you're running to improve joint integrity, right? Again, there's different ratios and optimal dosages between all of these compounds. Now, I feel that GHK-copper is a more sustainable TB500 or BPC-157, even though for all three peptides, the research is a little bit limited. Now, when you look at BPC-157 or TB500, you see that there's angiogenesis involved. And even though they say the same thing for GHK-copper, I feel that the data doesn't suggest as much angiogenesis as TB500 or BPC-157, making GHK-copper a more sustainable peptide to run. Also considering that GHK-copper is a bioidentical peptide, it's already present within the human body. So the biological pathways are a little bit more optimized, and your body should generally accept it better for prolonged periods of time over the TB500 or the BPC-157. Now, as of now, GHK-copper has been investigated for wound healing. It's been investigated for anti-aging, to improve skin texture and help with skin tightening. And I've been investigating GHK-copper when it comes to the growth of skeletal muscle. I noticed that when I was injecting GHK-copper, that skin at the injection site would get a little bit thicker over time. So I like to inject conveniently. Again, I was doing subcutaneous injections with GHK-copper because it is a quite painful injection. There's a little bit of post-injection pain for an hour, sometimes even 5 hours. It's quite an uncomfortable peptide to run on a daily basis, but hey, the collagen synthesis benefits are quite noticeable. So what I did before was doing subcutaneous injections on my quads, somewhere around where the separation should be. And then after a few weeks, I noticed that my separation was going away. My skin was getting thicker. And that's something I don't like because I like my quads to be separated up and down. So I started doing the GHK copper injections intramuscularly to help with a little bit of shoulder issue, right? I think I mentioned that in a previous video already. I administered the GHK copper here in my shoulder. And after 2 or 3 injections, the injury, the pain that I had in my shoulder was gone. I continued with this protocol, and now I can swear it feels thicker, and it's also getting stronger over the last couple of workouts. I've done the same practice with a little bit of a knee pain that I had previously, where I noticed that after administering the GHK copper subcutaneously on the top of my quads, I noticed that the pain in my left knee was going away slowly as a systemic effect. And then I started injecting it a little bit closer to the site of injury, and now that problem is gone. So I would mostly look into GHK copper as a method to increase collagen synthesis at particular areas. Now, and whether that results in spiking particular body parts because you want collagen synthesis only in the chest. Again, I'm running that experiment. And yeah, it really, it is quite noticeable, guys, even though the chest injections are a little bit awkward. So this GHK copper, even though the evidence is quite limited, when it comes to collagen synthesis at the site of administration, it is quite noticeable. I've already instructed several of my clients to run comparable protocols. And even though there's not so much data and it might be a little bit of a new bro science method to proceed and help keep your connective tissue as strong as possible, or remove little nagging injuries with 1, 2, 3 localized administrations. As of now, it's got my seal of approval, and it's something I'm looking into in the future going forward, and I can recommend other people to look into as well. All right, and before I wrap up this video, let me give you guys 3 different protocols with the ideal ratios between these different performance-enhancing drugs for collagen synthesis and joint integrity and optimal strength of connective tissue. Again, these are ratios based on my experience, what I would do myself with my clients, and things I ran past very knowledgeable people in the fitness industry over the last couple of years. A cruise would look something like this: 100 milligrams of testosterone, 50 milligrams of Nandrolone, and 100 milligrams of Primobolan per week. On top of that, consider 5 milligrams of Oxandrolone sublingually before the workout. So if you train 5 times a week, that would be 25 milligrams of Oxandrolone per week. And if you train 6-7 times, that would be more, obviously. So the total intake for optimal joint integrity, connective tissue, and prevent yourself from getting injured during your cruise, a dose that's sufficient, probably more than sufficient, a dose that probably can give you some strength gains while you're cruising and cleaning out and optimizing your health. A dose that's sufficient to sustain all of your strength and perhaps increase on it will be 275 to 285 milligrams of anabolic androgenic steroids combined on a weekly basis. With that, I would consider 1 to 2 units of growth hormone and 2 milligrams of GHK copper per day, right? So that's 1 unit to 2 units of growth hormone and 2 milligrams of GHK copper on a daily basis. The growth hormone you can do subcutaneously, and the GHK copper probably intramuscularly, even though the post-injection pain is legendary and will last for a couple hours. I would use the GHK copper to spike a particular body part that you're either trying to improve or that you're having an issue with, to get some localized collagen synthesis out of it. And then a moderate cycle would look something like this: 250 milligrams of testosterone per week, a therapeutic dose of 100 milligrams Nandrolone per week, 300 milligrams of Primobolan per week, and then 10 milligrams of Oxandrolone pre-workout sublingually. So let's say that's 5 workouts per week, 50 milligrams Oxandrolone on a weekly basis, resulting in 700 milligrams of anabolic androgenic steroids combined. Now, for that, I would consider 2, 3, maybe even 4 units of growth hormone. I like 1 unit of growth hormone per day for each 250 milligrams of anabolic steroids that I take on a weekly basis. So if I take 700 milligrams, around 3 units of growth hormone, I feel that that's an ideal ratio. If it's around 250 milligrams of steroids, I would consider 1, maybe 2 units of growth hormone, right? And if it's 2,000 milligrams of steroids, well, that I would go up to 8 units of growth hormone, albeit that my wallet would not be agreeing with me. So that's 2 to 3 units of growth hormone in this moderate cycle of 700 milligrams anabolic androgenic steroids, and consider 5 milligrams of GHK-copper on top to promote localized collagen synthesis. And then a blast. This will be a moderate blast in many people's books, but hey, I got to keep it moderate for everybody. 500 milligrams of test, 200 milligrams of Nandrolone, still therapeutic. Again, I don't want to overdo the Nandrolone because of the bloating and all the negative potential effects regarding heart remodeling and that kind of stuff. Right? A therapeutic dose of Nandrolone is more than enough to help with joint integrity. You don't need to blast your socks off on Nandrolone unless you're moving mountains of weight and you have some long-term experience under your belt and you can stomach 1,000 milligrams of Nandrolone with 1,000 milligrams of test. Right, that would be a super blast, personalized for you and you alone. In this context, 500 test, 200 Nandrolone, 700 Primo per week, and then maybe 20 milligrams Anavar. Sublingually pre-workout, so it will be 140 milligrams Anavar per week, resulting in a total of 1,500 milligrams anabolic androgenic steroids combined, allowing for a budget of up to 6 units of growth hormone, right? 1,500 milligrams, 1,540 milligrams of steroids per week, and then 6 IUs of growth hormone per day. And then the GHK-copper would go up to 10 milligrams. Again, you can space these injections out, right? You will do maybe 3 injections of 2 IUs of growth hormone and maybe 2 injections of 5 milligrams of GHK-copper. All right, I'll leave it at that, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you're looking for the most comprehensive guides to bodybuilding pharmacology, you can find the ebooks on my website, vigoroussteve.com/shop. Personalized advice always available through a consultation. You can find the rates in the consultations section. Follow me on Instagram @VigorousSteve. Look at my link tree there. You can find everybody and everything that I'm associated with. Gorilla Mind, Young LA, Gympin, iHerb. I've got discount codes for all of these companies because I support them. I like their products and everything that they stand for. Give that link tree a look and then see if you can get yourself a discount at one of these companies. I'll give you guys a frontal bicep. The testosterone and the Primobolan and the GHK-copper is getting into effect. There's no growth hormone in these biceps as of now, but never say never, right? I feel I'm making a little bit of progress. Some collagen synthesis is being stimulated properly. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you in the next video where we'll discuss how to heal yourself from injury. But hopefully the previous 3 videos gave you enough information never to get injured anyway. So maybe that one will not get so many views.